Tim, great to have you on. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Jay, Lars, and it's great to be with both of you guys today. It is hard to escape, isn't it?
It is.
Anytime we hit 9/11, so many memories for me. I was actually, if you don't mind my indulging.
No, we've been sharing our stories, so yeah, please.
I was working the U.S. Open for CBS, and a lot of people might say, "What? You did tennis at CBS?" I did. I did a lot of things at ESPN too that people have forgotten about, a lot of sports. But I enjoyed doing tennis in the time that I did it. But it's not a sport that I necessarily need to do, and certainly with college football running at the same time. The reason I was available to do it was because at CBS back in those days, we didn't have the SEC games start up, as you might recall, until week 3 because of the U.S. Open. So this new thing called HD was coming out in 2000. And in order to have high-definition broadcasts in those days, technically, you had to have a separate truck and a separate broadcasting crew. So while I think at the time it was Dick Enberg and Patrick McEnroe and Mary Carrillo and the usual ones. You see, Tony, the great veteran Tony Trabert, who worked with Pat Summerall back in the 80s and 90s, and a former U.S. Open winner, Grand Slammer, tennis Hall of Famer. Tony, wonderful guy. He and I did the high-definition coverage, which I think probably were only maybe a 5,000 HD homes out there at that time. But it was fun to do. It was something I really enjoyed, and because it was the U.S. Open, it was a little bit of a bucket lister. So CBS asked me to do it, and I obliged. I left. We did the Serena. You might recall that year, Serena lost to her sister in the women's final. And the next morning, after the men's final, I flew home from Newark. I still have the ticket with me on American Airlines because I was flying from Newark to Dallas to home to Shreveport. 9/10/01. So the following morning, I might have been there. If I had left a day later, it's surreal when you think of it in those terms. And then, of course, 11 days later, and this is the other factor, we didn't know, if you guys might recall, the SEC was the last conference to say they weren't going to play the next week. So we were well into Tuesday, and we really weren't sure, and it looked like the SEC might be the only conference that played. The commissioner had not, by this time, all the other leagues had begun to say they're not going to play. So, but the NFL hadn't done anything yet. So the NFL, I think, determined maybe early on that Tuesday or Wednesday what they were going to do. Vern Lundquist and his wife were on a trip. They always go. Vern consistently, he and his wife Nancy would always go on these long trips abroad, and they were in England, and he couldn't fly back. So I get a call from my executive producer at the time telling me that they needed me to get to Gainesville, and they were going to send Spencer Tillman with me. And the only way we could do it, because there were no flights, was for us to I was going to get a rental car in Shreveport, drive to Baton Rouge. Spencer lived in Houston on I-10. He was going to get a rental car, drive to Baton Rouge. We would then meet up with a limousine service that was going to drive us all the way to Gainesville, Florida, so we could call the Florida-Tennessee game. Fellas, I'd already gotten the rent car. I was driving down I-49 headed south for a game I really didn't want to do. All my life I was pining away for an opportunity to do a game like Florida-Tennessee back in those days. But I can just remember saying to myself, my God, I don't want to be calling this game. I mean, I can't imagine, because there's going to be a crowd, no matter what. It's just going to sound, if I get excited, how does that feel? How does that sound? It seems so awkward to me that we were being asked to do this. And I'm halfway to Baton Rouge, and I get a call from Terry Ewert, who at the time was our executive producer, and he said, Tim, you can turn around the commissioner of the SEC. The NFL had just said they weren't going to play, and Commissioner Kramer did the same thing. And, fellas, I got to tell you, I can't imagine saying this now, but I've never been so happy to be told I couldn't do a big college football game as I was that day.
Somewhat relieved, I guess.
Yeah, because it just at some point it would have been inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as big as that game was, and it was the defining game of the SEC back in those days, you got to take yourself back to where Florida and Tennessee was at that time. That was, in a lot of ways, the Alabama-LSU game of the 2007 through 13, right? I mean, that was the biggest game in the league. And, the crowd, at some point, the crowd's going to get excited when there's a touchdown. And for me, it would have just been really, really awkward to have been that excited to have been covering a college football game the way the country was feeling at that point. So I was never so happy to go home. My little daughter was at the time a fifth grade cheerleader for her for her elementary school. I enjoyed my weekend at home and being with my family. And then 11 days later, I flew into and flew right over Ground Zero, going into New York for a very solemn studio the following week. But I will say I saw acts of kindness that I had never seen in my life once I got to New York. And experiencing that entire season, going back and forth, Ground Zero still had, when you flew over it on a clear day, you could still see the fire burning. 11 days later, 20 days later. I mean, and so it was etched in your mind every week when you went in there. But so yeah, it was an amazing time. But I also saw merchants and restaurants giving free food to the firefighters and first responders that were still there working at Ground Zero, and everybody was so nice to one another in a crazy way. Especially the times we live in today. I really wish we could all find a way to go back to remember what it was like at that time, so that we could just be, kinder people.
So united.
Yeah. We were a much kinder people at that time, and sadly, it took that kind of sort of Pearl Harbor of our generation moment for that to happen.
Yeah, Tim, Jay and I were just talking, and I lived in Manhattan at the time, and I saw firsthand just merchants opening up their shops, and people just being as united as ever. Political party didn't matter, just socioeconomic background didn't matter,
and not just in New York. It was happening all
everywhere.
over the country.
Yep.
Everywhere. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it just put everything in such perspective for us, And I remember about a year later, perhaps, I was Spencer and whenever what usually would be Tony Barnhart, Archie Manning, Spencer, and myself going out to dinner on a Friday night before we were in the studio. And I think it was probably about a year later. We went out and we overheard a couple of cabbies screaming at each other, having some road rage outside the hotel. There's one language that not all cab drivers in New York are going to speak our language, but there's one word that unifies the world that you can understand when they say it. And that word came out from one of the cabbies.
Yeah.
And I remember the bellman at our hotel, the old Regal Royal on West 54th between 6th and 7th, turned around to me and he said, Mr. Brando, we're coming back. That's New York.
I love it.
Yep.
Man, Texas A&M gave Clemson a fight. I just want to get your take on Jimbo's team and how well they play, and especially Kellen Mond.
Very impressed. A lot of people were questioning whether Mond was the guy, both short and long term, and I think he more than acquitted himself nicely in that matchup. And I thought defensively, they did about as good a job as you could imagine. I mean, the touchdown pass that Trevor Lawrence threw was, just an outstanding individual effort on the part of a freakish athlete at wide receiver. Clemson's really good. That defense is outstanding. I think everybody knows that. Along with probably Auburn, I think probably the two most stout defensive fronts in terms of not just run stopping, but obviously getting pressure. So that, for A&M to play that well, I know there's no such thing as moral victories for a program as proud as the Aggies, but for Jimbo, certainly bodes well moving forward, and should, I think, probably get some attention from the rest of the SEC West, that A&M is a legitimate team to keep an eye on in terms of being a threat. Mond, more than anything, I think just stood up to what Clemson was doing as well as you could possibly hope. And were it not for that, the situation with the ball going out and touchback or not, it could have been even dicier for Clemson. But
what did you think it was? Was it touchback?
I thought it was what it was. I thought that they got it right without an angle. And I'm in the booth a million times, guys. Without the actual, and every camera, it's really a shame that we don't have the means technically to get a camera on the line for every game. Not every game's got it. It's just a shame that we don't.
Can they not put it in the pylon like they have the goal line? Just put it on the side.
You'd like to, but it comes down to availability and whether there's a cart camera available. One of the things college football's got a problem with is not all these stadiums will allow for a cart camera that can move with the ball because the fans are so tight. There's no room for the cart camera. And when I say cart camera, when you go to a game, if fans go to a game, watch and see if there is a camera following the line of scrimmage down the field. You can only do that in stadiums that have enough room along the sidelines for the management of that cart camera. And now I think it's more fashionable for the bigger games to have what we call a jib camera or sky cam, which gives you that kind of circular view, which is, I think, maybe the best camera in sports right now. And, the NFL, the Sunday night games, they've toyed with the idea of covering an entire game that way. When they had fog, they used it. That thing costs about $35. I want to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 for a single game, and you can get it probably for $35,000 if you do it in bulk, if you buy it in bulk. So it's costly. Had that camera been available though, straight down the line, we would have gotten the answer. But I can tell you, being in the booth all the time, when they are looking at just the spotting of a ball, sometimes you see the angle. You also see the unofficial yellow line that we have, and it's never consistent. You're never going to consistently get the true angle. So to me, if they had called it the other way, I don't think you would have turned it over. I don't think you would have reversed it. But you also didn't see enough to justify reversing that call either.
Tim, Alabama opens up SEC play on Saturday, traveling to Ole Miss. The Rebels quarterback Jordan Ta'amu leads the SEC in passing yards with 784 and touchdown 7. What's your assessment of this game? Does Ole Miss have the firepower to keep this close into the third quarter, into the fourth quarter?
I think it could be very similar to the game, Lars, that they had a few years ago when Kelly and company, they got out to that big lead and they couldn't hold it because they just didn't have the personnel defensively. The receiving core is so good. I mean, Jay, how'd you like to have those guys to throw through on both sides?
Oh, yeah. I mean, or even the ones in Alabama right now. Which, no disrespect to my receivers I had because they were all tremendous.
Yeah.
That's some really good ones.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And Ta'amu is all that we thought he would be. And you can see now why Shea Patterson, got out of there and went to Michigan. It is unreal. Alabama is a different animal, and obviously Ole Miss, torched the Texas Tech team that had 10 returning starters, but that was a bad defense to start with. So the pressure will be different. The looks obviously are always different when you go up against Saban. But I would tell you Ta'amu's got some plays in him. So I think a lot of it will depend on how they start. Ole Miss needs to score early and try to maintain pace of play to their liking. The one thing about this new Alabama is that they can match that firepower with their own. Tua is so good. The Alabama offense is now beginning to look a lot like the Ole Miss offense used to when they won those two games successively with Hugh Freeze as head coach. So I think ultimately Alabama's defense is too stout, and they will pull away in the second half. But it could be entertaining, and there's a confidence, I think, within the Ole Miss program that a lot of those guys on that staff have experienced some good things, and I think they remember the pounding they took a year ago. So it could be a little closer early, but ultimately Alabama will pull away.
Tim Brando, Fox Sports, joining us, and to the quarterback situation for the Crimson Tide. I know that's a lot of people said Jalen may redshirt this year. Is he going to just play 4 games? There's all these, thoughts and ideas out there. And there were a lot of rumors that were swirling that were very, very close to the program. He played this weekend and seemed really comfortable in the role that he has now. He's kind of you got the opener and the closer when it comes to quarterbacks at the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I think everybody's counting, aren't they? I mean, we're at 2. When do we get to 4?
Yeah, I don't think it matters.
I don't think it matters either. And I frankly, he's such a good kid. And whatever the noise is, and some of that noise may have come from his own family, obviously, I think he's eliminated it now. And it's in a lot of ways, it's a win-win. The one thing I noticed, Jay and Lars, is whatever guys like me say, people are going to twist it into whatever they want. All that matters is what Jalen thinks and what Saban thinks. And if everything's going according to form, then I think they probably have some packages using Jalen Hurts when they really need it in concert with Tua. I keep thinking at some point we might see them out there simultaneously in a critical situation late in the year, and that potential is there. The guy that I think this affected the most actually was Nick, because I think that because of the new rule and because of the circumstances, it played into his head, and understandably so. He was going to be more protective than usual, and he's always protective, I think. So I think more of this has affected him than affected the 2 quarterbacks, to be honest with you. The bit of soap opera and the sound bite that came from Jalen exacerbated all that a few weeks ago, but I think that's been quailed down quite a bit, and I don't suspect that there's any issue whatsoever from Jalen Hurts' point of view and the role he's going to play for this team, because he knows he's got a future. And when this is over, he's got a grad year ahead of him wherever he wants to go, so why not enjoy it? When you say win-win, I think that's really what it is. It's a win-win for Alabama.
Tim, Auburn has won 13 straight games at home. They're roughly a 10-point favorite against LSU. What do you see in this game of the Tigers versus the Tigers?
Lars, there was a time when home field meant nothing in this series, and now it seemingly means everything. Last time LSU went in there, they actually probably should have won the game. Didn't. Think about how history has changed from that game and the crazy world of SEC football, right? LSU scores, but it doesn't count because of time mismanagement by Coach Miles. He winds up losing his job, and what happens to Gus Malzahn?
Extension.
7-year, $49 million contract. I mean, think about that for a second.
I remember we some of us in the media referred to that as the buyout bowl, and
I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that everyone was accurate when they said the loser of this game is going home, and going home to stay. And it's interesting how that all worked out. And in the end, look how Gus kind of got the memo. He brought in Chip Lindsey, who I think was a marvelous hire, somebody you can trust, an Alabama high school coach who knows the offense inside out. Now you get a quarterback from a transfer situation like Stidham, who can really run it the way Chip wants it run. It just it all fell into Gus's lap, but it wouldn't have had it not been for that 1 second. He had some great fortune with 1 second. In individual games.
He has.
In his history as head coach. I don't think there's any denying that. But LSU's victory last year was, I thought, in a lot of ways, it said a lot about Ed Orgeron's leadership skills now and where he is. And I think it is time to stop throwing dirt on the Orgeron hire, big time. And you throw the Troy game away, which a lot of fans don't want to throw away. But look at what he did, the win against Florida, the win against Auburn. Now, the Notre Dame debacle at the end, that's the reason why seemingly his job was on the line as we started this season. And from what I've seen, particularly in the Miami game, I'm not going to use the Southeastern game as a gauge last week at all. I think that LSU is in a good place right now. I really do. And I told a lot of their fans that they needed to stop thinking about jumping off the Mississippi River Bridge before the season began.
They seem to have a quarterback now.
Yeah, well, you know what they've got? They've got an intelligent quarterback that won't lose the game.
Yep.
Jay, I mean,
got him into some good plays against blitzes.
My God,
that blitz run call he made.
Absolutely,
Yep.
The audible to Brissett was not a play that anyone at quarterback could have made since maybe Mettenberger or Matt Flynn was there. And now they've got confidence in him. He was well coached at Ohio State at the quarterback position. There's no denying that. And he's a good kid. Everybody looks to him and his leadership skills. And the running backs they may not be as well known, but they're still, stout. They're still good. And I think over time, Brissett may be the one that emerges, but we'll see. And the LSU receivers, I think, are better than most people think. So I think this game could be great. But it does seem now that home field does matter more in this series than it used to. And I remember a time in the 80s and 90s when the home field meant nothing in the Alabama-LSU